different variations of it, yeah. Could be, yes, yeah. I mean, all these things, yeah. It's a weapon. It's a weapon. I heard about it 3 years ago. The old papers are published in 2019 and everybody's doing it now. Yeah. So it's, yeah, but the thing is,
forces somewhere or other managed to do, bring together
all the data.
Yeah.
It's happening already. Yeah. We talked about discussions about ethics.
Yes.
May I just draw your attention to the housekeeping notices which are being displayed on the screen and ask you to read through them. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Doug Veal, your chairman for the afternoon, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this fifth in the series of Tony Kent Strix Memorial Lectures. I need to point out that this afternoon's proceedings are being recorded and video streamed. If any of you wish to tweet, you can use the hashtag Strix2019. You've all read the housekeeping, you've all turned off your mobile phones, haven't you? And just to reinforce the fire exits, for those near the front, it's here behind that curtain, and for those at the back, it's out where you came in and back out onto Piccadilly, and in both cases end up in the courtyard of Burlington House. There's one slight change to the programme, which is that Professor Cox has to leave fairly soon. So we're going to do the presentations at the beginning before the first lecture. So these lectures are in memory of Tony Kent, who was an ornithologist originally, and I worked with him for a number of years. And when we set up the award, we used the name Strix, which reflects his ornithological interest. It's the Latin name of the tawny owl. And the award takes the form of an owl, and as usual, I have brought the owl with me. And here it is. I won't bore you with all the history of that, but if any of you want to know more about Tony Kent and the award, there is a booklet which is produced annually, and a PDF copy of that will be emailed to you after the meeting. So I think that's all I need to say by way of introduction. Oh, when we get to any discussion, question and answer sessions, please wait for the microphone to reach you and talk into the microphone and announce who you are and where you're from. Otherwise, the poor people watching the streaming won't hear a word you say. So, next thing is to go on with the presentations, and I'm going to do, first of all, the 2019 winner, Professor Ingemar Cox. Professor Cox actually has two chairs. He's a professor in the Department of Computer Science at University College here in London, and he's also a professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Copenhagen. He's worked on many areas relevant to information retrieval, in particular digital watermarking and a Bayesian image retrieval program called PicHunter. He's received many prizes, awards and honours, and now another one. I've got a list here, but I won't read them out because it would take too long. So it's my pleasure now to invite Professor Cox to come forward and receive the award for 2019. And the award will actually be presented by David Ball, who is the chairman of the UK EIG. There's your certificate. Andy, get some good photographs.
Thank you very much. Maybe shake hands.
Just get a face on picture. Here we go. And another one. And another one. Let's see.
Sorry, I spoiled the picture. Oh, wow, that's another. Okay, thank you.
This one you get to keep.
Okay, I didn't think I was keeping it. Thank you again.
The second award is to Professor Pia Borland, who was the winner last year, but unfortunately couldn't be here. So now we will present the award to her. Professor Borland, is a professor in the Department of Archivistics, Library and Information Science at the University of Oslo in Norway. And she has worked on a number of areas, including particular interactive information retrieval and the knotty problem of relevance, which I wrestled with for many, many years. Professor Borland's work built on that of Stephen Robertson, who was actually the first recipient of the Strix Award, and unfortunately is not here today, although he usually comes. So it's now my pleasure to invite Professor Borland to come forward and receive her award.
Peter, if you could just look my way. Thank you. There we go. Lovely.
Just for that second. Yeah.
Okay, I'll take that.
Yeah.
Always take 3.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You will, of course, hear more about what Professor Borland's work has been on when she gives the Strix lecture after tea this afternoon. But before that, and you'll hear more about Professor Cox when he gives the lecture next year. But before that, we have a lecture by one of my colleagues on the Strix Committee, Andy MavFarlane, from University College.
City.
City University. City University. So it's my pleasure to invite Andy to address us on the subject of sender versus recipient oriented information systems revisited.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. Seems quite a cryptic title, but there is method in my madness. There is something that has been niggling at me for quite a few years now, and I hadn't really got a handle on how to address it until I read an old colleague of mine, Gabriella Kazai, pointed me to a paper that Nick Belkin and Stephen Robertson wrote in 1976, in which they pondered on the implications of research into theory and information science, and they were worried that this could potentially be misused. And they focused really on the sender versus recipient orientated systems, and they were sort of worried that, potentially it could orient more towards the sender rather than the receiver. So this is really what I'm going to try and talk about today. So firstly, what I want to do is just give an overview of that problem, that issue. Have a look at the overall perspective on the problem that they identified then and predicted quite clearly, in my view. Think about present-day effects, and then review these in the light of some quite clear guidelines in terms of information science and ethics and search. Really, what we're dealing here is with search technologies. Thinking about some approaches to solve the problem and some recommendations for systems design to start to solve the problem. I do not have the golden bullet to solve all the problems. What I want to do is try and get our community, to address what I regard as being a serious issue, and of course I'll give a summary and conclusion at the end. Okay, so some background to this. So I assume everybody's heard, or most of you have heard, of the Shannon model, which is a way in which people can think about how communication happens, and it's used a lot in a lot of information science theory. Now, essentially, you have an author or a sender and a reader or recipient, and you have an intermediary. Now, that intermediary, certainly when Belkin and Robertson were writing, was a librarian or information scientist. These days, it is an information retrieval system that sits between the reader and the author. And that's what mediates the communication between them. Now, the objective really is to meet the needs of the reader. The problem is, as Belkin and Robertson pointed out, is that if you understand the needs and behaviours of the recipient or the reader, that means the author or even the intermediary can use that information for their own ends. Okay. Now, I think they predicted problems with things, and I think I'm going to come on to this in a moment, with problems with Facebook and other systems. And what I'm going to argue for in this presentation is a return to a recipient design for search technologies and related technologies. So, a historical perspective on the problem. So, as I said earlier, Belkin and Robertson recognised this in 1976. And before them, in a more general sense, when they were thinking about computing, Norbert Weiner, back in 1954, had thought of some issues to do with the impact of technology, but was more general. Okay, Belkin and Robertson were really dealing with our area. Now, what Belkin and Robertson were worried about, as I said earlier, was that, understanding if we take information science theory and understand it, we give people who have, for example, who want to use that information maliciously to manipulate people, either in advertising campaigns, for example, or even in political campaigns. They speculated as to whether or not actually this research should be done, and they pointed to some various ethical issues, obviously. Now, when I read this, I thought, my goodness me, you could predict the problems with Facebook, etc. You might not have known the specific, the specific way it was going to turn out, but you could see the problems in what you were doing. And they pointed to dilemmas in other fields, in genetics and nuclear technology, where they have the same sorts of issues. Okay, so that's the historical perspective on the problem. So what are the present day impacts and effects? So Belkin and Robertson's hypothesised it is difficult to predict exactly to what any research results will be put, but if the possibility for malign applications exists, it will be realised. Now, I think we all know of events, and I'm going to point to at least a couple of them, where in global information systems, Google, Twitter, and particularly Facebook have become very prominent in regard to this, of where this has happened. Okay, where, frankly, immoral actions have taken place. Now, what we need to do, in order to think about this problem, we actually need to think about what is it we're dealing with here, and that's dealing with user interactions. Okay, so let's go back and think about the user and what their interests are. In order to do that, what we need to do is we need to look at what they do with systems and how global information systems, well, not just global information systems. I mean, I'm looking at this, but you could potentially, it could be used in other search environments, in patent search, in law search, in systematic review search. There are a wide variety of different applications where these issues still apply. Okay, a lot of what I'm talking about is the web, but it's a lot more widespread than that. So, what are the things what is the data? What do we collect about users? Well, there's query data, there's results list data, and there's document data. So let's have a look at some of the problems that can occur. Firstly, with queries. With the AOL log scandal, it's a classic case of doing something that you think is going to help the academic community, and you end up damaging people's interest. Now, what happened is AOL released this search log without actually properly anonymising it. And a couple of New York Times journalists got hold of this log, looked through it, did some research, as journalists are apt to do, and found somebody, rang them up and asked them, "Are you searching for this?" And she said, "Oh, yes." So when you do searches, even at the query level, you are saying an awful lot about what you are interested in. Also, results-less, again, with click-throughs, you say a lot about yourself, but it's not just the click-through data, it's what happens when you click on that. Very often you'll notice this, particularly if you have a Mac, there's something called little snitch that I've got on my Mac at home. And what it does, when you get a third party, when you navigate to a page from a search engine result, and it tries to link to a third party, you'll get a warning. And it's amazing how many warnings you will get, okay? Now, this is a particular problem for health, where you're searching for health information. You know, you'll be amazed at how much information can be gathered about you on all sorts of different things. And then, of course, there's ranking schemes. The first page of a search engine research is primary real estate, okay? So that's often open to attack. No, there is obviously an ongoing war between search engines and spammers over that prime real estate. So that's the result. And then there's a document itself, or a document can be any media, by the way. So people engage with documents in different ways. They like them in Facebook, they dislike them in YouTube, in Amazon, or in IMDb, in recommendation systems. People will often provide a score to a film or a book, and often upload some information about how they view that book or film. So there are all sorts of things to do with privacy and filter bubbles here. Those are the two big issues. It's very, very easy to violate your privacy, okay? So, for example, in document data, there's evidence that you, with just a few likes, they can infer a lot of personal characteristics about you. For example, what your age is, what your sexuality is, what your political preferences are. So, you know, you give an awful lot of information away out when you do any of these things here. And of course, then there's the problem of filter bubbles as well, being forced down into particular ideological viewpoints. Okay, I have to say, just as a warning, there is some doubt as to whether technologically focused filter bubbles, user-created filter bubbles, exist, but it's quite clear that sender-focused filter bubbles do exist. I think very much we're looking at the wrong way around. It's not the technology that causes the filter bubble. We need to look at what's going up here in filter bubbles. Something that is, Tom Wilson said, is not directly observable. So just a couple of examples for you, and we'll all be quite familiar with these. Firstly, there's the Brexit referendum. So, for example, you could easily target your likes to particular areas who you think would follow your particular, who were going to vote your particular way. There's one particular strategy that was used by one campaign that basically they use this sort of Waterloo strategy. The idea behind it is the Battle of Waterloo, British troops sort of sat down, waited for the order, and at the end they got up and fired their guns to defeat the French. Well, it's sort of like this really, is what you do is you test your ideas, and at the end you target what you need to. And then there was lack of content on one side. This is a particular issue. It's the zip distribution again. One side of the argument was very much talking a lot about this issue. The other one wasn't. So there was a lot more for one side of the campaign to hang the hooks on and contact people. Very difficult for the other side. And then there's the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where basically they were gathering data for the 2016 presidential election. And to cut a long story short, they were able to target messages to people to either vote or abstain, the persuadables, okay? So there are clear cases of potential manipulation going on using this type of data. And both examples, plus many others, justify Belkin's in Robertson's fears, in my view. Okay, so let's now think about the ethics. So it's quite interesting. When I was doing some research for this, it was quite clear that there was a lot of interest in ethics, largely off of what Belkin and Robertson were talking about. But it's quite, you pick it up. Unfortunately, some of it is not available for various reasons because it wasn't online. But it's quite clear that there was a lot of discussion here. And they came up with what I think is 3 quite good principles, ethical principles that I think we can consider. The first of these is the principle of confidentiality. Fairly simple. User inquiries should be kept confidential. So the results list, query and document data, their interactions should be kept confidential to them without their privacy being violated. That's the whole point. Next one is principle of accessibility. You should not discriminate on the basis of somebody's attributes. So whether or not, it doesn't matter what your age is, your gender, your sexuality, your political persuasion, you should be able to see a bit of information irrespective of that. And then there's the principle of completeness. So you shouldn't be presented with biased results. Fairly straightforward. So how do we return to these principles? Okay, now that the horse has bolted. With great difficulty, but at least we can make a start. So some approaches to solve the problem. So let's think about a design service ethos which is recipient focused and have a holistic approach. I think what I'd like to do is, and this is certainly happening, is there's perhaps too much focus on content and not on the context. So just using the content, a content-aware approach is not sufficient. We need to use a context-aware approach. We also need to establish user control. We need to focus on the recipient, I have to say with caveats, which I'll come on to in a moment. We need to think about the various privacy strategies. Again, that is very, very context dependent. I can't give you a definitive answer. It will depend on the context. But it will be driven by what the user wants and needs and what their interests are, not what the interests of others are. And I'm also assuming most systems now really are client-servant architectures, and it doesn't matter what application. We're mostly dealing with the web, but most systems, whether it be law, patent, health, systematic review, have a server somewhere and a client through which you, usually through a browser, through which you interact with that data. So it's very much getting the balance between. I think the argument is you hold the data where necessary, and where data should only be held at the server when it is absolutely necessary to do that. It should be mostly held at the client where they can control it. Basically what I'm arguing for is the principle of control. Returning control to the end user to make sure that they have the ability to ensure that their privacy is adhered to, that they, even that they're not trapped in filter bubbles. Now, a caveat here, control does not mean complete control. Now, the reason I say that is because there's a benefit between giving away your privacy and actually getting the benefits, okay? And that's quite a difficult tension to make, okay? So we know that, and we've known for a while, and Google has been doing this for a while, providing contextual search can actually help you find what you want to. So we don't want to get rid of that, but we don't want to violate your users' privacy either. So getting that or pushing people into filter bubbles. So getting that private that tension right is not an easy thing to do. Secondly, users, and we've known this from the Carpi experience when they had a look at relevance feedback. If you give users too much control, they'll often damage their own interests. So the searches that they do will be ineffective. Now, we've known that for many, many years. Okay, so I'm not arguing for complete control, but I am arguing for at least establishing some control for the user to foreground this issue of privacy and filter bubbles. Okay, so let's think about some recommendations for system design. So what I'm trying to do here is just to recommend a broad strategy. Okay, I'm not thinking about specific technological solutions here. It really is a broad strategy. So what I'm going to do is look at the 3 principles that I outlined earlier and think about how we can strategize this using at the client and server level. So what I want to do, firstly, ultimately what it's about is about addressing bias, okay? Bias that takes away control from you to somebody else, to some other third party or to the sender or to the intermediary, and bring it back to you, okay? So, and there are all sorts of bias. Now, the first one I'm going to deal with, and this is dealt with at the server side, is the principle of completeness. Okay, presenting non-biased results. Now, and I'm going to give this really is from Ricardo Baza-Yates, has a really, really good paper which I'd strongly recommend on bias in the web. So I'm basing my ideas on this, on that paper. But again, bias is not just in the web. If you look through systematic review research and the searches they do for systematic reviews, they are obsessed about bias. Okay, well, so we need to be obsessed as well. Okay, so there are all sorts of different bias. The data of content, we've known from the early days of the web that through links, data can be biased. Okay, so it's produced by. If you're using a machine learning algorithm, if you use an incorrect sample, you can bias your ranking algorithm. In terms of algorithms yourself, you can, if you just use a single algorithm, that can actually, but algorithmically, that can bias you in one way. So breaking out of that is a useful thing to do. It's quite interesting. Some colleagues of mine at City work on nuclear power stations and safety critical systems, and they have this idea of design diversity, where you use different systems to ensure that you come to the right decision. So if it says if this can continue, this nuclear power plant can continue, it can only do so if both systems say that it does. Okay, so that's something we can think about. And then there's activity bias. Now, everybody's heard of the ZIPS distribution. Well, you have, and it's very much to do with content and what people do. You get a few people who produce lots and lots of content. You get a few people who do lots and lots of searches, and then it goes down like this, and you have this long tail. Most people are in the long tail. The problem is if you're not careful, all you can do is, and it's very, very easy to use the fat bit and not the long tail. So we must not forget about the long tail is where the users are. So, okay, so how do we do this? Well, I've already made some suggestions with regard to that, but how about letting the user know what's going on, okay? So, in terms of things like transparency, who holds the data, who holds it, in terms of notification, well, you have to do this now with GDPR, and they have full control of the data. So how do we get this? Sometimes it can be quite difficult, obviously, without algorithms, actually trying to get them to understand what's going on and out. This idea of explainability and search is something that we're starting to investigate. But how do we communicate this to our users? And then there's the principle of accessibility and confidentiality. So remember, accessibility is no discrimination, and confidentiality is keeping user inquiries confidential. So again, in the bias, there's no reliance on subsets of factors. We try not to push people into filter bubbles, and we try to deal with the bias interaction, which is any or all of the interactions, which is incredibly difficult and complex to deal with. So there are all sorts of different ways to deal with this. In terms of filter bubbles, people have come up with, well, actually foreground it. A simple way of doing this, actually, is to provide people with context-driven results as against side-by-side with non-context-driven. It's a very, very simple thing to do. And then other visualization techniques where you have, on one hand, you have a little figure with, in politics, if you're searching. On the left hand, you have something which represents the left content, and on your right hand, the right content. It's a really, really simple thing to do. In terms of privacy, third party, basically, the user needs to be able to control the applications on the client. Any data which is being accessed on the client should be notified to the user and only be accessed if and only if the user allows it. And requests to stop tracking should be adhered to, and there should be no data transfers without permission. And in particular, and this happens a lot, no just gestures of its intent. Like, for example, if you don't allow us to access your data, the world will, the sky will fall in and that sort of thing, giving you dire warnings. Okay, so just to summarise, so my basic argument is, in order to get back to the ideas that were set down, the ethical principles that were set down 30 to 40 years ago in terms of confidentiality, completeness and accessibility, we need to start thinking about how we can rebalance the control back to the user. The sender should not have control over the system. Okay, it's my view, and I strongly argue for that. Okay, it meant there have been attempts by social media giants and the big global information systems to address this issue. But a lot more needs to be done. And we need to think not just about the web. It's not just in the web. We need to think about other scenarios where people's privacy and potentially filter bubbles can occur. So over-tracking, hyper-personalisation, data breaches and misinformation, I think everybody has seen in through various media is a serious concern to society. There are recent trends that we can draw on. I talked earlier about explainable search. That's really part of explainable AI. Okay, that's a good. I welcome that idea, and also diversification, diversifying the results. So my basic argument is, let's think about how we can return to the ethical principles that were laid down 30 to 40 years ago in the information science community, so that we can start dealing with the problems that we know are self-evident and we see every day. With that, I would just like to thank firstly, I'd like to thank Gabriella Kazai for identifying the Belkin and Robertson paper in Search Solutions. She's talking about explainable search. And also like to thank my colleagues Stefan, Sonders and Maricela, who helped me with the material with this paper. And with that, I would like to take any questions you might have.
Oh.
Hello.
Thank you, Andy.
I think it's working now. Hello. Andrew,
wait
thank
for
you.
the microphone, please.
Yeah, he's got one.
Oh, you've got one, sorry.
Yep.
This is Adnan from London South Bank University, and I'm team manager for systems. You mentioned about the privacy. I know there are various aspects, and global information systems, or social media we call it, they are more reactive rather than proactive when it comes down to ethical compliance of privacy, and only legislation can actually tie their hands. In recent GDPR, there is a discussion around right to be forgotten. But in your opinion, how you think the law is robust enough around right to be forgotten? Because the privacy and data, as you say, could exist in multiple platforms and in multiple avenues. Do you think that the information, or sort of the education level or understanding level within the masses is at that level that they could utilize this provision of law to erase their, or sort of take control of their privacy data? Is it robust enough, or the information or the understanding within the masses is there yet? What is your take on that?
I'll be honest with you, I don't really know enough about the law to mention on that, or to make a statement on that. I know David Haynes might have more of an idea than I do, but I do think it's a minefield. I mean, something actually I should have made clear earlier is I'm very much focused on the system design, okay, and the user. We can't do it on our own. We need people in the legal domain. We need people in business models to help us with this issue. We can't do it on our own. So I'm sorry I can't directly answer your question, but I think it is a valid one, and I think we do need to address it with the help of others.
We'll take John next.
Andy, thank you for a very good talk. But there's something I want to say to you, that many of your principles are fine, and I understand why you want them, and they're the things that should be considered, certainly by ethical people working on all sides of this industry. However, I do wonder whether your principle of completeness is a sensible direction, at least without some more specific definitions. Maybe we're using the term differently, but I think information retrieval is all about biasing results. It's about biasing results towards the most relevant results in some broad sense. Now, I've got no problem with rebalancing that, but isn't that what we're doing? So trying to eliminate it is actually, in some sense, a wrong-headed thing to do.
Yeah, I think, yes, you're right. Yeah, in the sense that what you're doing is you're biasing your results, hopefully, on the needs of the user. So you're right, you don't want to get rid of that. I think what my argument is what you don't want is that principle of completeness is user-driven, not recipient-driven. So what you don't want... Sorry, sender-driven. What you don't want is the sender, people who, for example, in political campaigns and advertising, want to alter that ranking to give information that they want you to see, not what you want to see. But yes, you're right. Yeah, it's tricky to deal with. It's not easy to deal with.
Lady here.
Holly Cook from East Cheshire NHS Trust. On the aspect of user control you were talking about, have you done any work or aware of work with the blockchain in going to address that, perhaps?
I haven't, no. There's something. One of my colleagues introduced me to this idea of privacy-enhancing technologies. So there's a whole series of different technologies that we can look at. So whether it be blockchain, whether it be privacy-enhancing technologies. At the moment, I'm just looking at the strategic level. But at some stage or other, we are going to have to deal with this. So blockchain and privacy-enhancing technologies are two of the things that we are going to need to look at.
Yeah, I think it's quite exciting in terms of the user control and being able to access only your own private data by having a private key to each chain. I think, we could... exploit that.
Okay.
Gentleman here.
Ian Rothman, University of Strathclyde. Thanks, Andy, for the really interesting presentation. There's a lot to unpick, and I was interested in it seemed that the principles that you were introducing from Nick and Stephen very much told the kind of history of search systems as coming from the library background, where the role of the library is to provide trusted, quality information from a neutral perspective.
Yes.
And then, but it seems that for a long time that was the underlying principle of information retrieval systems, and now for the last maybe 10 years more, it's moved into much more commercial, give users what they want as long as it's legal. And that's kind of led to the hyper-personalization and so on. But your perspective of let's introduce more diversity, let's get people out of their filter bubbles, seems to be introducing a different kind of control that's more authoritarian. It says, we're going to show you what's good for you, even if it's not what you want. Yeah. So I wonder if you could maybe say something about the tension there, about what is the role of IR systems now?
Yeah, I think, again, it's... What I don't want to do is introduce yet another problem by the way, there is some doubt as to whether technologically focused filter bubbles actually exist. I mean, some people say that there might be an effect. It's only a minor effect. I have to say, in a close election, that could make a big difference. But yeah, I think it's very much a case of giving the user sufficient. It's taking away the control away from the sender and the intermediary and giving it back to the user, and just getting people to think more about the way they think about information. Rolling out information literacy programs more generally. As I said, I focused largely on system design. We can't do it on our own. We simply can't do it. We also, by the way, need to deal with the business models problem, because a lot of this is to do with the way Facebook works on advertising. Now, I simply don't know how we're going to get round the problems we have with Facebook unless they change their business model. I just don't see it.
Thank you very much.
Gentleman over here.
Andy, you've just answered my question.
Hi, John.
First of all, thanks for the presentation. I thought it was extremely stimulating. You're right. I think the issue that I was going through my mind is that the business model of Facebook, of Twitter, even of Google to some extent, is essentially that of highly targeted hyper-targeted in your phraseology advertising. It's difficult to see how any of the systems you might put in place will survive or work if it fundamentally undermines that business model, or those business models. So it's again, I suppose, being slightly critical of your approach, but trying to be realistic as well.
Yes, you know, as I keep saying, it's not going to be easy, but at least we ought to. I mean, I have a personal view about. I don't have a Facebook account anymore. I deleted mine because I wasn't prepared to put up with, frankly, with their. Have a look at their data policy. It's about one sentence, and what it says is, "We can do what we like with your data." No, I'm not tolerating that.
Stella?
No.
Again, thanks, Andy. Very stimulating and provocative talk. I should say, I'm Stella Dexter Clark, and I'm retired now, so no affiliation to bias in what I'm saying. A couple of people have commented, have gone back, have taken up your final line, which was, let's bear in mind those principles. And I, too, would like to question the principles, because the trouble with ethical questions is very often it's hard to tell right from wrong. It is really hard to have good, robust principles. And if I think particularly about the second of the three principles you put up, the one that was accessibility, which, in my mind anyway, boiled down to everybody should have equal access to everything. And the question in my mind is, but what about vulnerable people? For example, children. I mean, we don't want children to get access to things where suddenly they're going to spend lots of money on the credit card of their parent, perhaps, on something that was not a good idea for them. Or what about people who suffer from an addiction, such as gambling? And we don't. It's not help. It's not in their best interests to have access to. Or obese people. It's just rotten to be putting in front of them pictures of cakes and chocolate and sweet things.
I think
there has to be some way. I'm sounding like the nanny state, but there's got to be something.
Again, it's going back to this tension that I have. It's not easy, and for very, very good reasons. You will not want some people to see some types of information for very, very good reason. But unless or if there is that good reason, then you should not deny people access. I mean, my counter-argument to that would be one of free speech. I'm a very, very strong free speech advocate. Going back to what Milton said in his famous pamphlet on licensing way back in the 17th century. And what he said was, let truth and falsehood tussle. Who never knew truth being trounced in an even or open encounter. Now, I'm paraphrasing Milton there, but I think that is an important principle. We do need information where it is appropriate to do so, to be made available. And again, Milton talks about, sometimes it is well, actually what he argued that, because he was arguing about licensing books, I think, if I remember rightly, and what he said was that any penalty should be after. Sometimes he was talking about blasphemy or libel or things like that. The penalty should be afterwards. Now, you can argue about that in certain cases, but I think, you're right. I mean, it's an issue. I don't have. Yeah, you're right to raise the issue. I don't have any golden bullet to solve that particular issue, and it's one which society struggles with and has been done and will do for many years.
Okay, I agree with you on the free speech thing, but I think we do. The tension is there, and we do have to keep on arguing and improving not just the systems, but also our understanding and society's acquiescence, discussion and acquiescence in what are the basic principles, and I don't have any silver bullets either.
Okay.
Someone else.
The lady in the orange behind.
Oh, hi. I'd call it yellow, but there we go. I guess that's the point, isn't it? People have different perspectives. But thank you very much for the lecture. Oh.
No, you're on. You didn't introduce yourself, which I...
Oh, okay. Sorry. Jane List, editor of World Patent Information, and definitely from the professional search community. Although I did work, or at least learn from some of your colleagues at City University 30 or 40 years, well, 40 years ago, in fact. No, 30 years ago. But my journal is 40 years old. So I totally am really interested in what you're saying, going back to those principles. I teach search, and I totally agree about information literacy being really an important topic that should be taught. And what does that mean? I think people are coming to I teach patent searching in particular, and intellectual property, about intellectual property information. And there's very much a feeling from digital natives and mobile natives that because they can search on Google or Facebook, they can search, and also that the machine will give them the right answer. So we're having to go back to principles and explain to people that they need to instruct the machine where to go in order to give them the right answers. The answers that not the right answers, because there's not a right answer, but that they get the information they need. And I think there's a kind of danger that in general, people are putting together the kind of Facebook, Twitter problem, which is really largely about communication and putting people in touch with each other, and not really about delivering information. And I think I'd like to join you from the professional community to kind of work out what we need for the kind of systematic review type information and
Yep.
IP information for business. Thank you.
Yep.
Hello, Nikki Brown from John Wiley & Sons. I was just picking up on a few things that people have said about whether government should be more involved in this area, in this subject, and also and how they could possibly address it. But also another key word, which I think we've just been talking about as well, was education. But I'm thinking about it in, a much wider viewpoint. Everybody uses computers, everybody uses tablets and smartphones, but they're not educated right from the start, right from when they're children, about what not always, that is a good way of using that and the pitfalls to look out for. Do you think the government, because everything can't be legislated, but should there be more legislation around misuse of the internet and misuse of people's private data? Should there be more policies, do you think, government policies? They do seem to work on some level, especially in schools. And also more emphasis on the ethics of using social media. I don't know if I'm framing that very well, but I was thinking...
I get you. I get the idea. I mean, the problem is, do you trust the government?
Not necessarily, but it's got to be a start.
Yeah, I guess they are ultimately, no matter what government we have, they do represent us. We do elect them. They are therefore accountable to us, and we should be able to pressurise them to do the right thing. So it is a potential. Going back to the issue of free speech. It's, we need to get our ideas across to them and just talk to them about this particular issue. So I'm not sure if I...
Lady over here.
Yes. Hi, Manuela from King's College, Research Support and Scholarly Communications. I was just very interested in hearing a little bit more about what you said about assuming a client-server architecture.
Okay.
Would it be like going back to FTP protocol and bypassing the hypertext? How would you do that in a linked data environment like internet is now?
Well, it pretty well is. The client server is the basic model, and through that you can implement that in all sorts of different ways. Okay, so you can put a broker in between them. You can have a 3-tier architect. You do all kinds of things. Okay, I'm very to be honest with you, I'm not particularly, as I said earlier, I'm not really so much interested at the moment in the specific technology. What I'm more interested in is building a strategy. We need to get the strategy right before we get the technology right. If we don't get the strategy right, then forget about the technology. This needs to be user focused, not not technology. The problem is we've been far too technology focused and not sufficiently user focused. David.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Andy. I thought that was a very enlightening talk, and I was particularly pleased to learn about how Nick Belkin and Stephen Robertson had kind of anticipated a lot of the problems that we're now facing. I think that was very interesting. I should just introduce myself. I'm David Haynes. I'm chair of ISCO UK. I'm also affiliated with City University of London, and also shortly to be working at Edinburgh Napier University. I really wanted just to explore a little bit more about this idea about how do we move forward, because you've posed a problem that we're trying to face, and it seems to me that some of it is about the strategy, but some of it is about regulation, which I think Nikki was talking about, and then also about education, that we can't move forward unless there's some kind of legislative framework in place to provide us with those provisions. And it may be that what we're looking at is people becoming more safety aware when they're online, which is a part of our education, but also backed up with some kind of legislation and some kind of enforcement where the rules are not obeyed. Right.
Okay, so I attended a few weeks back now an online harms workshop which was led by the EPSRC. Essentially, the government, I think it's the Department of Culture, Media and Sport and the Home Office are putting some money in to firstly set up a centre for excellence to deal with this issue, specifically in the UK, and they're putting in a lot of money. It's overall, I think it's about £40 million. So I think that call will come out in about January, and then there'll be some funding which I think will be made available through the Centre of Excellence. And then sometime next year, they'll be looking for about 4 big projects. So look out for that. So this will be if anybody in this room who's from UK academia and wants to get involved with this, then let's talk. Because we need to, there is this opportunity. So that's a funny answer to your question, but I thought I'd mention it because it is being thought of. And we had people from not just people, nerdy hackers like me, but people from all walks of life at that workshop. So they're not just looking at technologists, they're looking at people from business schools, people working with charities, etc.
Thank you. Yes, I think there's some real potential there for collaboration between institutions. I'd be interested.
Gentleman over here.
Okay. Hi, I'm Ingo Vormals from the University of Bedfordshire. Very interesting discussion here, and we see the problem is on so many levels. I'm wondering, when we talk about legislation and regulation, we talk about a worldwide network here. Is that even possible to regulate it? And sometimes I wonder, maybe a bit nostalgic, I don't know, to go back to the good old days and when we had something like Usenet and Internet Relay Chat and these kind of things. We now have Mastodon as a kind of Twitter equivalent, and these services are decentralized. So there's no company behind it that owns everything. Probably, I sometimes wonder if we just go back to that, if maybe some of the problems might disappear.
Well, it's nearly time for tea, but I'm going to exercise the chairman's prerogative and ask the last question.
Okay, right.
You said it's not only the World Wide Web, and you're right, of course, but I wondered how you saw the relationship between the sort of things that you're advocating and what Tim Berners-Lee has just come out with about how he would like to see the World Wide Web evolve from here on.
Okay.
There seem to be some
yeah,
parallels.
it's on my reading list. I haven't read it yet, yeah, but it's on my list. I'm afraid that I can't say more. But I should have. I meant to read that this morning, but I forgot, which is really annoying. But yes, I need to, yeah. I'd be fairly obviously. I'd be interested to see what he has to say.
All right, that sounds like watch this space.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, well, I think it's time for tea, so we'll draw that discussion to a close, and I think the intensity of that discussion is an indication of how relevant and stimulating the issues that Andy has raised are. And so perhaps you'd like to join me in thanking him once again.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Tea is in the library, which is just across the corridor from where you go out here.